As we get into Form 3508, it is the long form. It is going to take you the most time to go through. And I really would say only use this one if you have to. If you don't meet the easy criteria, then you have to use this one if your loan amount is more than $150,000. There are a couple of safe harbors here. And one is if you've had no reduction in the employees or the average paid hours. This covers the things that we talked about before. If you did have a reduction in your full-time equivalents, you can go to safe harbor number 1. And what that is again, this statement about you're unable to operate between February 15th, 2020 and the end of your covered period due to the compliance with the federal agencies or your governor's requirements for operation under COVID. Okay, so if you could not maintain your FTE as a result of complying with the requirements at the federal or state level, and again, that's an directly or indirectly, and it impacted you, and you had to reduce your staff, you're okay. You have a safe harbor there. The other option is that you could have fluctuations during your covered period in your FTE, but if you restored your employee number last year on a first draw PPP loan in 2020, you restored your employee number by 12/31/2020 to what you had at the beginning of the year, you have a safe harbor there. For this year, again, if you had fluctuations this year, but you got back your FTE back to the number you started the year with, then you're compliant there and you can use safe harbor number 1. And I'll show you how that impacts you as we go through these forms. However, if you did have fluctuation in your FTE and it was not a result of compliance, you just with the governor's guidance or the federal agency's guidance, and you reduced your staff, then you're going to have to do a little bit more work. And we're going to show you how to do that next. So next slide, please. You have to start with page 5 of the 3508 instruction form. And you go through steps 1, 2, and 3 on pages 5 and 6 of this document. What I really want to have you understand is make sure that you are looking at the information correctly and looking at the reference points in each one of these steps. Okay, so step 1 addresses your average annual salary or hourly wage during the covered period. And then you have to put in step 1B, the average annual salary or hourly wage during the most recent full quarter before your covered period. Again, what is that? If you got a loan last year, that's first quarter 2020. If you got a loan, first draw or second draw loan this year, or maybe both, it's first quarter 2021. All right. So be very careful about what information you're putting in here to help minimize your, the impact of these reductions on your forgiveness amount. Then you go to step 2, there's references for the date of February 15th, and then the period of February 15th through April 26th, 2020. So again, just look at the information that's being requested to make sure you're complying and truly answering the question so that you're not punishing yourself and reducing your forgiveness amount arbitrarily or inaccurately. All right. Step 3, again, starts here, 3A, and next slide, please, goes on to page 6 of the instructions. So when you get down to 3E, and there's evidence that there was a reduction, a dollar amount reduction in the compensation, that is the dollar amount that you have to enter in column 3 or for the Schedule A Table 1 worksheet. We're going to look at that next. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. So after you have filled out all the information as needed on pages 5 and 6, only for those employees who were impacted by salary or hourly wage reductions, then you go to table 1 of the PPP Schedule A worksheet. And what you're doing here is you're listing all the employee names, the last 4 digits of their tax identification number, their cash compensation, their average FTE, and if they did have a calculated salary or hourly wage reduction, you would put that information here in the last column. Then what you do is you add up all of your employees' cash compensation, the average FTEs, and the total salary or hourly wage reduction calculations that you made. You will now have totals in box 1, 2, and 3 of table 1. What I want to emphasize is table 1 is for only those employees who receive compensation from the borrower at an annualized rate of less than or equal to $100,000 for all pay periods in 2019, or were not employed by the borrower at any point in 2019. All right. Table 2, as you drop down, is for all of the employees who were compensated at more than $100,000 in 2019. So you put the employee's name, their last 4 digits, their social security number, their cash compensation, and then their average FTE. You total those 2 columns, and now you have information in box 4 and 5. What's the operative word here? These tables 1 and 2 are only for employees. They are not for the owners. Okay. Excuse me. So just the employees. Next slide, please. At the bottom of this page, you now have to go through and do your FTE reduction calculation for safe harbor number 2. Okay, so here's what I want you to keep in mind. Again, you only have to do this section if you actually had a reduction in your FTE and you were not able to comply with the safe harbor related to the requirements or guidance by the federal agencies or the governor, and you were not able to reestablish your FTE at the end of your covered period, or December 31st, 2020, if your loan was last year, to your prior period FTE. All right. So I know this is a little confusing. So again, what I'm going to say is if you actually reduced your FTE because you chose to, rather than because you were trying to comply with the federal or state guidance, and you could not restore your FTE to your pre-COVID FTE numbers by the end of your covered period, then you have to complete this section. And this section will result in a calculation that you'll do later on these forms that will also reduce your forgiveness amount potentially. All right. So you go through steps 1 through 5 and you just do the math. All right. But again, I want to say pay close attention to the dates that are referenced here, because I don't want you to punish yourself arbitrarily by not complying with the date requirements in here for the information. All right. Next slide, please. Schedule A is one piece of this application that does need to be submitted to your lender. So on line 1, you are transferring the information that you totaled in box 1 from the Schedule A worksheet table 1. Line 2 is a transfer of the information in box 2, and line 3 is a transfer of the information in box 3, all from Schedule A table 1. And then you drop down to lines 4 and 5. They are transfer information from the worksheet for box 4 and box 5. All right. Now, line 6 is you're totaling the amount here that was the employer contribution for the employee group insurances. Line 7 is the employer contribution for the employee retirement plans. Line 8 is the employer contribution for the state and local taxes assessed on the employee compensation. So lines 1 through 8 have to deal with the compensation only for the employees. When you drop down to line 9, that's where you put in your compensation for the owner employees or the self-employed individuals and general partners, okay? And if there's more than one owner in the business that was compensated, then you need to do a separate table for them and transfer that information in. So you're creating a manual table that you would attach with this document, all right? But that would only be for the owners if you needed to. And then you're now totaling your payroll costs. On line 10, you're adding up lines 1, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And keep in mind, line 10 of Schedule A will transfer over to the first page of your application for forgiveness document. Next slide, please. We're almost done. So how am I doing time-wise?
Well, we're a little bit over. So if any of our viewers have to go, remember we are recording this. So if you need to come back, you can watch the end of it later.
Okay. And I cut this down. Okay. So now on page 3 at the bottom of this particular form, you're looking at compliance with the full-time equivalency issue. All right. So here's what I want you to hear. Line 13 is where you have to put a number. All right. If you had no reduction in employees or average paid hours, you mark the little box and then you put a 1 on line 13. If you were able to answer yes to the FTE reduction safe harbor number 1 that I've been talking about, compliance with the guidance or requirements of Health and Human Services, Center for Disease Control Prevention, OSHA, or the governor, you mark that little box and you put a 1 on line 13. However, if you could not comply with either of those, then when you did that 5-step information on the prior sheet, on line 11, you're going to transfer over the average FTE calculation from that worksheet and put it on that line. And then you're going to take line 12 again by adding up lines 2 and 5 from that worksheet and putting the number there. And then for line 13, what you will do is take line 12 and divide it by line 11, and it will be a number less than 1. Okay. And again, remember, line 13 is transferred over to the first page of the application for forgiveness document. We'll see that in a minute here. Next slide, please. At the top of the form, same information I've said before. Next slide, please. But at the bottom of page 1, you are now compiling all of the uses of the proceeds. Line 1, again, is a transfer number from Schedule A, line 10. That represents all of the payroll costs for the employees and the owner employees. Line 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, I've gone over already as it relates to that easy form. It's the same compliance issues here, okay? So you're putting in the dollar amounts that you spent on your covered period for these different types of expenses. Now, when you go into lines 9, 10, and 11, you're entering information in to potentially reduce down. Yes, this last form is the 3508 form. On lines 9, 10, 11, you're making potentially adjusting entries to your forgiveness amount. So on line 9, you are transferring over the dollar amount that you calculated in box 3 of the worksheet that transferred to Schedule A, line 3. Okay, so if you had a reduction in the salary or hourly wages, you have a dollar amount of that total. All right, that's going to go on line 9. Line 10 you're adding up lines 1 through 8 above. And then you're subtracting the dollar amount you entered on line 9 for the wage reduction calculation. Line 11, you're now taking the FTE reduction quotient that was on Schedule A, line 13. That number is either going to be 1 or less than 1. All right. And then you have to figure out your potential forgiveness amounts. So on line 12, you're taking your modified total. You are multiplying line 10 above by line 11. And you're putting a dollar amount in there. Line 13 is your PPP loan amount. And line 14 is that calculation where you're taking line 1, your total payroll costs, and you're dividing it by 60%. And again, you're dividing it, not multiplying. And then you make a determination amount, your forgiveness amount. And that is on line 15. And you're entering in the smallest of lines 12, 13, and 14. Okay, so whichever one is smaller on the potential forgiveness amounts is the one you put on line 15. Now, here's what I'm going to just say globally. If you did have adjustments on line 9 and line 11 that could potentially reduce down your forgiveness amount, then what I would encourage you to do is try and expand out your covered period. If you started with maybe the 56 days, maybe you want to expand that out to 100 days. When you do the math and see if you can still achieve full forgiveness by doing the math functions here, okay? Because the more money you put in toward payroll costs and other allowed expenses, then the less the impact is of line 9 and line 11 on your forgiveness amount, okay? Next slide, please. So now these are the pages that have the representations of certifications. Again, you have to initial each one of these as being true and correct. Next slide, please. And this is just the bottom of page 2. And again, you're initialing there, you're signing, printing your name, and putting the title of the authorized representative and the date you're submitting the form. Again, this may all be electronic depending on your